look at the anger in this guy's eyes when he's talking. I want to remind you that the person who is uttering these words eulogized Robert Byrd, who was a grand poobah whatever for the KKK, and then became a senator, and he said he's one of the greatest men he ever knew. This is a guy who said he didn't want his kids going to school in a racial jungle. This is a guy who said that that Barack Obama was like a clean, whatever, smart, good-looking black guy, which you don't have many of those. This is the guy who said, who his now Vice President Kamala Harris in the first Democrat primary debates called him a racist. This is that guy who says these words at this historically black college. Play the clip.
It's a battle that's never really over. But on the best days, enough of us have the guts and the hearts to stand up for the best in us. To choose love over hate, unity over disunity, progress over retreat. To stand up against the poison of white supremacy, as I did my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy. And I'm not saying this because I'm at a black hbcu. I say it wherever I go. To stand up for truth over lies, lies told for power and profit. To confront the ongoing assault to subvert our elections. Press our right to vote.
That's exactly why you were saying it, Joe. You said white supremacy is the biggest terrorist threat to our homeland. White supremacy. You knew exactly who your audience was. You knew exactly what you were saying. You know exactly where, why, and when you were saying it, okay? You were saying it to a black audience, and you got your little cheap applause about saying white supremacy is the biggest threat, the terrorist threat to the homeland. Okay. I've got an issue with that because here's the deal. When you say white supremacy, you're just saying white people in general. That's what you're saying. You're saying anybody that is MAGA Republican, anybody that is right of center is automatically a white supremacist. Automatically a white supremacist. We just had a shooting in Allen, Texas 2 weeks ago where a Hispanic guy shot the place up, and he was a white supremacist. So anybody that's not black basically is a white supremacist that has any differing opinion from the progressive left. Now, the biggest enemies in America, and specifically to the black community, folks, are not white supremacists. They're not. Now, to my knowledge, I have never met a white supremacist. Therefore, I've never had a conversation with a white supremacist that I know of. And growing up in the deep south of Georgia in the 1970s and 80s, one would think that I should have crossed paths with at least one white supremacist. I jumped on a Twitter space the other day, which I think was about 99% black people in there. Somebody said, you got to get on this Twitter space. And in there, they were actually having conversations. Every person that spoke was talking about things like, we got to bury these white possums and how white people need to die. Here's the deal, my friends. The biggest enemy to America, and specifically to the black community, is Democrats. And more specifically, Democratic policies. Now, it amazes me that the black community, in particular, continues to vote in, policies that have consistently and historically kept them in physically, morally, circumstantially, spiritually, economically, psychologically, and emotionally impoverished circumstances. I mean, Einstein was right in saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But yet, here we are. Now, I know that the current social trend is for me, a white man, to shut the hell up because it's none of my business. I can't speak on this. But the President of the United States has now made it my business. And he has provoked me to a point where I need to show you what his speech should have been when he spoke at a historically black college. This is how he should have spoken to them. But see, Joe doesn't have the balls to tell them the truth. But I do. I got the balls. I got a big old giant sack of them. The biggest enemy, the second biggest, because Democrats are the biggest enemy to the black community. The second biggest enemy to the black community, which is a direct result of Democrat policies, is guess what? Fatherlessness. Not white supremacy. It's fatherlessness in the home. You say, you can't say it. Oh, I can say it because it's a fact. And I want you to think about this. Compared with white women, black women are 25% less likely to have ever been married and about half as likely to currently be married. In 1998, about 29% of African American women aged 15 and over were married with a spouse present, compared to 55% of white women and 50% of Hispanic women. Now, until the 1960s, the percentages of black and white women currently married with a spouse that was present in the home were virtually the same, as about 66%. And until 1960, about 95% of children in the U.S. were born to married parents. By 2008, that number had fallen to 59%. 36.5% of single-parent, female-headed households are in poverty, and only 6.4% of married two-parent families are poor. So when President Johnson's war on poverty began in 1963, only 7% of the children in the U.S. were born out of wedlock. But by 2008, that number was 40.6%. 72.3% of black births are out of wedlock. Did you hear me? Almost 70, 3/4 of black births are out of wedlock. So until the 1960s, the black family was mostly intact, two-parent household. And furthermore, the incarceration rate of black men was about the same as the white men until the 1960s. Now, however, these days, 37% of all male prisoners in the U.S. are black. And listen, when you think about the fact that blacks comprise about 13% of our population, that's astounding. Furthermore, from 1930 to 1940, the height of the Great Depression, everybody was broke, and we had legalized discrimination against black people in America, and the Jim Crow South was in effect. There was only between 22% and 26% of all prisoners in federal and state prisons were black. By 1964, 33% were black. By 1986, the number was 44%. Now, sociologists will wrongly tell you that poverty leads to crime during the Great Depression. And I know there's people going to argue back and say, oh, but they're in poverty, they're poor, they have to commit crime, they're forced into it just to survive. Oh, no. During the Great Depression, the unemployment rate in black America was 45%. That's right. If there was ever a time for crime to go completely out of control for the black community, it was then. But it didn't happen. You know why? Because the two-parent family was intact, and because those families held church and faith as a high priority. See, there's something interesting about having the fear of God instilled in you. You don't go out and kill each other, and you generally don't commit crime. So what happened? Why is fatherlessness in the black community so rampant? Well, there's this thing called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC. It was signed into law by Franklin Roosevelt in 1935. By the way, he's a Democrat, as part of the Social Security Act. Now, the SSA, the Social Security Act, was passed by a majority Democrat Senate and House. The AFDC, it's a grant program to enable states to provide cash welfare payments for needy children who have been deprived of parental support or care because their father or mother was absent from the home. They were incapacitated, deceased, unemployed. They just weren't there. And then in 1963, when Lyndon Johnson started his war on poverty, the majority of blacks in America voted for who? They voted for Republicans. You know why? Because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And by 1966, just 3 years later, LBJ was preoccupied with the Vietnam War. And the war on poverty, it started losing steam. So what happened was a married couple by the name of, and there were also Marxists and professors at the School of Social Work at Columbia University in New York, Richard Cloward, Francis Fox Piven, they developed a strategy to address this whole situation. They were concerned that administration of welfare payments by the states were too slow and not nearly as comprehensive as they should have been. And so what they were after was this federally funded and controlled welfare system, which would move the U.S. towards socialism. Now, keep in mind, this whole socialism experiment, even Vladimir Lenin said it's a logical step in leading to communism. And the Cloward-Piven strategy, what they wanted to do is flood the roles of state welfare systems and cause the systems to crash. Now, at that point, states would be crying for the federal government to bail them out of their welfare woes. And the ultimate goal was a guaranteed annual income. Does that sound familiar, that whole guaranteed annual income? They're still doing it. Still pushing for it. In fact, when we went through the whole COVID-19 power grab, federal government was shutting everybody down, state governments, they were following the exact same playbook of Cloward-Piven. And Cloward and Piven, what they hoped for, that when the state welfare system crashed, that the federal government would then step in and save the day. But how could they swell the welfare rolls? You know what they did? They used FDR's 1935 Aid to Families of Dependent Children and that policy to convince poor people that they could receive government welfare payments, and there was only one catch. They had to prove that the families did not have a father in the home. Now let's switch gears, take it one step further. Because I want to tell you this, the biggest mortal enemy to the black community, as I see it, it's abortion. You want to know what kills black people? It's abortion. We've already said 13% of the American population is black. They account for 35% of the abortions that happen in this country. 35%. Black women are 4 times more likely to get an abortion than white women. Democratic policies have made it convenient. It's made it almost necessary in the black community. 85% of Planned Parenthoods are within walking distance of an urban community. Abortion is the most demographically consequential occurrence for the minority population in America. You want to talk about equal opportunity? You don't believe in equal opportunity? It's an easily provable fact that the unborn black babies, they don't have an equal opportunity to even survive until birth. You have black abortion rates that are 25 per 1,000 females compared to white ladies, which are only 6.6. So for every 1,000 live births in the black community, there's 326 abortions. 62% of black lives, 62% of black lives end in abortion. There's 38 times more abortions among blacks than there are black homicide deaths. Oh, and by the way, blacks are no longer the largest minority group in America. That's Hispanics. You want to talk about crowding the welfare system? Well, with what's happening at the southern border and the influx of illegal aliens, do you have any idea the level of decimation that's coming to the black community? Holy crap. It will not be at the hands of white supremacy, my friends. Let me talk about another mortal enemy to the black community, crime. The black population, as we said, once again, makes up 13%, but they commit 60% of the violent crime in America. Fatherlessness. They don't know any better. They commit 33% of aggravated assault. They commit over 52% of the murders, almost 30% of the rapes, 53% of robberies. And here's the kicker. It's not the entire 13% that's doing these things. Instead, it's 25% of the male half of that 13% population. So when you realize that less than 3% of the population of America is responsible for over 50% of the homicides, for instance, you start to realize that there is indeed a cultural problem. It's not white supremacy. Now, if you're still with me and you disagree with me, that's fine. But I want to remind you that you're disagreeing on an emotional basis and not a factual or statistical basis. Now, the fact that we give ourselves over to emotions and feelings when discussing these things only further exacerbates a very large problem instead of bringing solutions into the light. So when Joe Biden addresses a historically black college and says that the greatest threat to America is white supremacy, he is quite literally full of shit and lying to that audience. Do with that information what you will.